The American War. The term American War is quite broad and could refer to several different conflicts involving the United States. Here are a few wars and military engagements that are commonly associated with the United States. First, American Revolutionary War 1775–1783. This war, also known as the American War of Independence, was fought between Great Britain and 13 of its North American colonies, which declared themselves the independent United States of America. The American Revolutionary War, also known as the American War of Independence, was a conflict that took place from 1775 to 1783. It was fought between Great Britain and 13 of its North American colonies, which declared themselves the independent United States of America. Causes: the war had its roots in a series of grievances and tensions between the American colonists and the British government. Some of the main causes of the conflict were: 1. Taxation without representation. The British government imposed various taxes on the colonies, such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, without granting the colonists representation in the British Parliament. 2. Colonial self-government. The colonists desired greater control over their own affairs and resented what they saw as British interference in their local governance. 3. The Proclamation of 1763. This British decree prohibited American colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains, which angered many who sought to expand into these territories. 4. Disputes over trade and economic policies. The British implemented trade regulations that limited the colony's ability to engage in free trade, leading to economic tensions. Major events: the Revolutionary War consisted of several significant events and battles. Here are a few key moments. 1. Battles of Lexington and Concord 1775, considered the first military engagements of the war. These battles erupted when British troops attempted to seize colonial military supplies. The American militia, known as Minutemen, confronted the British forces. 2. Declaration of Independence 1776. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, a document drafted by Thomas Jefferson that proclaimed the colony's independence from Britain. 3. Battle of Saratoga 1777. This pivotal battle in New York ended in an American victory and is considered a turning point in the war. The American win convinced France to openly support the American cause. 4. Franco-American Alliance 1778. The United States secured an alliance with France, a longtime British rival. French military support, including troops and naval assistance, proved crucial to the American victory. 5. Siege of Yorktown 1781. The American and French forces under General George Washington trapped and besieged a British army commanded by General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. The British surrendered, leading to negotiations that eventually resulted in the Treaty of Paris. Treaty of Paris 1783. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The treaty recognized the independence of the United States and established its borders. It also granted fishing rights to Americans off the coast of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and called for the return of confiscated property to Loyalists. Impact: the American Revolutionary War had a profound impact on world history. Some key consequences include: 1. Independence of the United States. The war resulted in the establishment of the United States as a sovereign nation separate from Great Britain. 2. Inspiration for future revolutions. The American Revolution served as an inspiration for other movements seeking independence and democratic reforms worldwide. 3. Shaping democratic principles. The war and subsequent creation of the United States influenced the development of democratic principles and systems of government. 4. Impact on international relations. The American victory and alliance with France shifted the balance of power in Europe and had long-term implications for global politics. The American Revolutionary War's significance in shaping the United States and its ideals of liberty and independence cannot be overstated. It marked a crucial chapter in the nation's history and laid the foundation for the formation of a new nation. The American Revolutionary War witnessed numerous battles fought throughout its duration. Here are some of the major battles that had a significant impact on the outcome of the war. 1. Battle of Lexington and Concord, April 19, 1775. This was the first military engagement of the war. British forces attempted to seize colonial military supplies in Concord, Massachusetts. The American militia, known as Minutemen, clashed with the British troops in Lexington and Concord, resulting in the British retreat to Boston. 2. Battle of Bunker Hill, June 17, 1775, fought on the outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts. This battle saw the colonial forces fortifying Breed's Hill. Although the British eventually captured the position, they suffered heavy casualties, which boosted colonial morale. 3. Battle of Saratoga, September 19, October 17, 1777, considered a turning point in the war. This series of battles took place in upstate New York. American forces led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold defeated British General John Burgoyne's army. The American victory convinced France to openly support the American cause. 4. Battle of Trenton, December 26, 1776. General George Washington led a surprise attack on Hessian mercenaries stationed in Trenton, New Jersey, crossing the icy Delaware River. The American victory provided a much-needed boost to morale after several defeats. 5. Battle of Princeton, January 3, 1777. Following the victory at Trenton, Washington's forces engaged and defeated a British garrison near Princeton, New Jersey. The battle demonstrated American resilience and improved confidence in their ability to challenge British forces. 6. Battle of Yorktown, September 28, October 19, 1781. This decisive battle in Virginia marked the last major engagement of the war. American and French forces, commanded by General George Washington and assisted by the French Navy, laid siege to British General Cornwallis's army. The British surrendered, leading to negotiations and eventually the end of the war. These battles represent only a fraction of the engagements fought during the American Revolutionary War. There were many other significant battles, such as the Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Germantown, and the Battle of Cowpens, among others. Each battle played a role in shaping the course of the war and the eventual victory of the American colonies. Second American Civil War, 1000. 861 1000. 865. This was a major conflict fought between the northern states, the Union, and the southern states, the Confederacy, over issues such as slavery and states' rights. The Union victory resulted in the abolition of slavery and the preservation of the United States as a single nation. The American Civil War, which took place from 1861 to 1865, was a major conflict fought within the United States between the northern states known as the Union and the southern states known as the Confederacy. It remains one of the most significant events in American history, with profound social, political, and economic consequences. Causes. The primary cause of the Civil War was the issue of slavery. A range of factors contributed to the tensions between the North and the South. 1. Slavery. The institution of slavery had long been a divisive issue in the United States. The southern states relied heavily on enslaved labor for their agrarian economy, while the northern states had largely abolished slavery and were embracing industrialization. 2. States' rights. There was a dispute over the balance of power between the federal government and the individual states. Southern states believed in the sovereignty of states and the right to secede from the Union, while the northern states emphasized the authority of the federal government. 3. Economic differences. The North and South had divergent economic systems. The North was industrialized and favored protective tariffs, while the South relied on agriculture, primarily cotton production, and was heavily dependent on exports. Major events. The American Civil War consisted of a series of battles and significant events. Here are a few key moments. 1. Attack on Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861. Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter, a federal fort in South Carolina. This marked the beginning of the war, as President Abraham Lincoln called for the Union to suppress the rebellion. 2. Battle of Gettysburg, July 1, 1863, fought in Pennsylvania. This was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Union forces, under the command of General George Meade, successfully repelled General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army. The battle is seen as a turning point in favor of the Union. 3. Emancipation Proclamation. January 1, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were to be freed. It shifted the focus of the war to include the abolition of slavery as a primary objective for the Union. 4. Sherman's March to the Sea. November-December 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman led a military campaign from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, inflicting significant damage and destroying infrastructure along the way. The march demonstrated the Union's ability to wage total war and had a demoralizing effect on the Confederacy. 5. Surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. This event effectively marked the end of the Civil War. Consequences. The American Civil War had far-reaching consequences for the United States. 1. Abolition of slavery. The war led to the abolition of slavery in the United States. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1865, officially abolished slavery throughout the country. 2. Preservation of the Union. The war solidified the authority of the federal government and established the principle that states cannot unilaterally secede from the Union. 3. Loss of life and devastation. The Civil War resulted in a staggering loss of life and widespread destruction. It remains one of the deadliest conflicts in American history. 4. Reconstruction era. Following the war, the United States entered a period known as Reconstruction, during which efforts were made to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved individuals into society. Reconstruction, however, was marked by significant challenges and struggles. 5. Transformation of the nation. The war brought about profound changes in American society, politics, and the economy. It accelerated industrialization in the North and led to the modernization of the United States as a whole. The American Civil War remains a complex and significant chapter in American history, reflecting the deep divisions and challenges faced by the young nation. Its legacy continues to shape the United States to this day. 3rd. World War I. 1917–1918. Though the United States entered the war relatively late, it played a significant role in the conflict. American forces fought alongside the Allies against the Central Powers, contributing to the eventual Allied victory. World War I, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict that took place between 1914 and 1918. It involved many of the world's major powers, primarily divided into two opposing alliances: the Allies, which included countries such as France, Russia, and Britain, and the Central Powers, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The war began on July 28, 1914, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo. This event triggered a series of diplomatic and military escalations that eventually led to a full-scale war. The war was characterized by trench warfare, with soldiers on both sides digging elaborate networks of trenches to protect themselves from enemy fire. The conditions in the trenches were extremely harsh, with soldiers enduring constant shelling, trench foot, and other diseases. Several significant battles took place during World War I. The Western Front, a series of trenches stretching across Belgium and France, witnessed some of the bloodiest and most prolonged battles, including the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun. On the Eastern Front, Russian forces fought against German and Austro-Hungarian armies, while other conflicts took place in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. New technologies and weapons were introduced during the war, such as machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and aircraft. These innovations led to unprecedented levels of destruction and casualties. The war also involved the first large-scale use of chemical weapons, which caused widespread suffering and death. The United States initially remained neutral, but eventually entered the war on the side of the Allies in 1917. This decision played a significant role in tipping the balance of power in favor of the Allies. As the war dragged on, the social, economic, and political toll on the participating nations became increasingly severe. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives, and many more were injured or displaced. The war also caused significant political upheaval, leading to the collapse of several major empires, including the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires. In November 1918, an armistice was signed, effectively ending the fighting. The formal peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Versailles, was signed in 1919. It imposed heavy penalties on Germany and its allies, contributing to the grievances that would eventually lead to World War I. World War I had a profound and lasting impact on the world. It redrew the map of Europe, set the stage for future conflicts, and profoundly affected societies, economies, and political systems. It remains one of the deadliest and most significant conflicts in human history. World War I was a global conflict that took place from 1939 to 1945. It involved the majority of the world's nations, including all of the great powers, organized into two opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis. The war arose from a complex set of political, economic, and territorial disputes that had been brewing since the end of World War I. The aggressive expansionist policies of Nazi Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, and the militaristic ambitions of Imperial Japan were key factors leading to the outbreak of the war. The conflict can be divided into two major theaters: the European theater and the Pacific theater. In Europe, the war began on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. This prompted France and Britain to declare war on Germany, marking the start of the European phase of the war. Germany quickly overran much of Europe, including France, and formed alliances with Italy and Japan, creating the Axis powers. In 1941, Germany violated a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and launched a massive invasion. The Eastern Front became a major battleground, with millions of casualties on both sides. The Soviet Union ultimately turned the tide of the war in favor of the Allies with their successful defense of Stalingrad and their subsequent offensive operations. In the Pacific theater, Japan embarked on a campaign of imperial expansion, attacking China in 1937 and later expanding into Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The United States, which had previously remained neutral, entered the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The Pacific theater was characterized by a series of intense naval battles, island-hopping campaigns, and major amphibious assaults, such as the Battle of Midway and the Battle of Okinawa. The war witnessed the implementation of new military strategies and devastating weapons. It saw the widespread use of aerial bombing, including the firebombing of cities and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the Holocaust. The systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others by Nazi Germany was one of the most horrifying atrocities of the war. The Allies, led by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, gradually gained the upper hand over the Axis powers. In 1944, the Allies launched a massive invasion of Western Europe, known as D-Day, and began to push back German forces. In the Pacific, the United States launched a series of island-hopping campaigns that brought them closer to Japan. The tide of the war turned decisively in favor of the Allies in 1945. Germany surrendered in May following the fall of Berlin, and Japan surrendered in September after the atomic bombings and the Soviet Union's entry into the war. Fourth World War I. 1941–1945. The United States joined the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. It fought against the Axis powers, which included Germany, Italy, and Japan. The U.S. made significant contributions to the Allied war effort and played a crucial role in the ultimate defeat of the Axis powers. World War I resulted in the loss of millions of lives, including soldiers and civilians. Entire cities were devastated, economies were shattered, and the political landscape of the world was transformed. The United Nations was established in 1945 as an international organization aimed at promoting peace and preventing future conflicts. The war also led to significant technological advancements, such as the development of jet propulsion, radar, and nuclear energy. It marked the beginning of the nuclear age and the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union that lasted for several decades. World War I remains one of the most significant events in human history, with far-reaching consequences that continue to shape the world to this day. The Vietnam War, also known as the Second Indochina War, was a protracted conflict that took place from 1955 to 1975. It was fought between the Communist forces of North Vietnam, supported by their allies from the Soviet Union and China, and the non-communist forces of South Vietnam, backed by the United States and other anti-communist countries. The roots of the war can be traced back to the mid-20th century when Vietnam was a French colony known as French Indochina. The struggle for Vietnamese independence led to a prolonged war against French rule, known as the First Indochina War, which ended in 1954 with the Geneva Accords. Under the agreement, Vietnam was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel into a communist-led North and a non-communist South. The United States became increasingly involved in Vietnam during the Cold War as part of its policy of containing the spread of communism. Initially, the U.S. provided economic and military aid to South Vietnam, but its involvement escalated over time. The U.S. believed that if South Vietnam fell to communism, other countries in the region would follow, a concept known as the domino theory. The conflict intensified in the 1960s as North Vietnam began supporting a communist insurgency in the south, known as the Viet Cong, which aimed to overthrow the U.S. backed government. The U.S. responded by deploying troops and escalating its military intervention. The war was marked by guerrilla warfare, heavy bombing campaigns, and large-scale deployment of troops by the U.S. military. The U.S. employed advanced military technology and conducted extensive aerial bombing campaigns, including the use of Agent Orange, a defoliant chemical, to destroy the jungle and deny cover to the Viet Cong. The war also witnessed the extensive use of helicopters for troop transport and firepower support. Opposition to the war grew in the United States and around the world. Many people protested against U.S. involvement, criticizing the war's high casualties, its impact on civilian populations, and the perceived lack of a clear objective. The anti-war movement became a significant social and political force, leading to protests, demonstrations, and even acts of civil disobedience. The war took a massive toll on Vietnam, both in terms of human lives and infrastructure. Millions of Vietnamese people, both soldiers and civilians, lost their lives, and many more were injured or displaced. The war also caused significant social and political upheaval in the United States, leading to divisions within society and a loss of faith in the government. As the conflict dragged on, the U.S. public support for the war eroded and political pressure mounted to seek a negotiated settlement. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, leading to a ceasefire and the withdrawal of U.S. troops. However, fighting between North and South Vietnam resumed, and in 1975, South Vietnam fell to the Communist forces of North Vietnam, effectively unifying the country under communist rule. 5th Vietnam War 1955–1975. This was a protracted conflict in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The United States became involved to support South Vietnam in its struggle against Communist North Vietnam. However, the war was highly controversial, and the U.S. eventually withdrew its forces without achieving its objectives. The Vietnam War had far-reaching consequences. It led to the deaths of millions of people, caused widespread destruction, and left lasting scars on both Vietnam and the United States. The war also had a profound impact on U.S. foreign policy and public opinion, shaping subsequent military interventions and fostering a deep sense of skepticism toward military engagements. The Gulf War, also known as the Persian Gulf War, was a conflict that took place in 1991 between Iraq and a coalition of international forces led by the United States. The war was triggered by Iraq's invasion and annexation of Kuwait, which Iraq claimed as part of its territory. The roots of the conflict can be traced back to long-standing territorial and political disputes between Iraq and Kuwait. Iraq, under the leadership of President Saddam Hussein, accused Kuwait of economic warfare and overproduction of oil, which it claimed damaged Iraq's economy. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces launched a full-scale invasion of Kuwait, swiftly occupying the country. The international community strongly condemned Iraq's actions and viewed the invasion as a threat to regional stability and the global oil supply. The United Nations Security Council passed a series of resolutions demanding Iraq's withdrawal from Kuwait and imposed economic sanctions on Iraq. Efforts for a diplomatic solution continued, but when Iraq failed to comply with the UN resolutions, a U.S.-led coalition assembled a military response. The coalition consisted of forces from over 30 countries, with the United States playing a major role. The coalition included countries from Europe, the Middle East, and other regions, all united in the goal of liberating Kuwait and enforcing the UN resolutions. The military campaign, known as Operation Desert Storm, began on January 17, 1991, with a massive aerial bombardment of Iraq and Kuwait. Coalition forces launched air strikes targeting Iraqi military installations, infrastructure, and communication networks. The air campaign aimed to weaken Iraq's military capabilities and pave the way for a ground offensive. After several weeks of intense aerial bombardment, the coalition launched a ground invasion on February 21, 1991. The ground offensive quickly overwhelmed Iraqi forces, liberating Kuwait in just a few days. The coalition's superior military power, advanced weaponry, and air superiority played a crucial role in the swift victory. The war resulted in a decisive military victory for the coalition forces. The Iraqi military was devastated and Kuwait was liberated and restored to its previous government. However, despite the overwhelming military success, the coalition forces did not pursue regime change in Iraq or advance further into Iraqi territory. A ceasefire was declared on February 28, 1991, following the liberation of Kuwait. Iraq was required to accept the terms of UN resolutions, including the disarmament of its weapons of mass destruction (WMD) programs and the establishment of a system for ongoing weapons inspections. 6th. Gulf War 1991. The United States led a coalition of international forces in response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The goal was to liberate Kuwait and protect other Gulf countries from Iraqi aggression. The Gulf War had significant geopolitical and regional implications. It demonstrated the effectiveness of a multinational coalition in addressing regional aggression and upholding international law. However, it also left unresolved issues in Iraq, including the question of Saddam Hussein's regime, the presence of WMDs, and ongoing tensions in the region. The conflict also had humanitarian consequences. Iraqi forces committed various human rights abuses, including the repression of uprisings by Kurds in the north and Shia Muslims in the south of Iraq. In response, the international community established no-fly zones to protect these groups. The unresolved issues and tensions that emerged from the Gulf War would eventually lead to a second Gulf War in 2003 when the United States and its allies invaded Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein's regime. The war in Afghanistan, also known as the Afghan War or Operation Enduring Freedom, is a protracted conflict that began in 2001 and is ongoing as of my knowledge cutoff in September 2021. The war originated from the U.S.-led invasion of Afghanistan in response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States. After the 9/11 attacks, the United States held the extremist group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, responsible for orchestrating the attacks from Afghanistan, where they had found safe haven under the protection of the Taliban, the Islamist militant group that controlled much of the country. The United States demanded that the Taliban hand over bin Laden and dismantle Al-Qaeda's infrastructure. When the Taliban refused to comply, U.S.-led coalition consisting of forces from NATO countries and other allies launched a military campaign to oust the Taliban regime and disrupt Al-Qaeda's operations. The initial phase of the war involved a combination of airstrikes and ground operations to target both Taliban and al-Qaeda forces. The Taliban regime was quickly toppled, and a new Afghan government was established under the leadership of Hamid Karzai. However, the war evolved into a complex insurgency as the Taliban and other militant groups regrouped and launched an insurgency against the Afghan government and international forces. The conflict in Afghanistan has been marked by guerrilla warfare, suicide bombings, improvised explosive devices (IEDs), and targeted attacks. The Taliban, along with other insurgent groups, has utilized asymmetric tactics to undermine the Afghan government and regain control of territory. 7th. War in Afghanistan 2001-2021 following the September 11th attacks. The United States led an international coalition in a military campaign against the Taliban and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The war lasted for 2 decades and resulted in the overthrow of the Taliban regime, but the conflict was not fully resolved by the time of my knowledge cutoff. The war in Afghanistan has involved a significant international military presence. The United States has been the largest contributor of troops, with other NATO countries and partner nations also deploying forces to support the Afghan government. The mission has focused on counterterrorism operations, training and advising Afghan security forces, and supporting reconstruction and development efforts. Over the years, the conflict has resulted in a high number of casualties, including both military personnel and civilians. The war has also had a profound impact on the Afghan population, with millions of people displaced and significant humanitarian challenges. Efforts to reach a political solution and bring an end to the war have been ongoing. Several rounds of negotiations have taken place between the Afghan government, the Taliban, and other stakeholders. However, achieving a lasting peace agreement has proven to be challenging due to the complex dynamics and competing interests involved. As of my knowledge cutoff, peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban were underway, and the United States and its allies were working toward a phased withdrawal of their forces from Afghanistan. Nevertheless, the future of the conflict and the stability of Afghanistan remains uncertain, and it is important to consult up-to-date sources for the latest developments. It's important to note that there were many other smaller conflicts, interventions, and military operations involving the United States throughout history. The term American war can be used in different contexts, so if you have a specific war or conflict in mind, please provide more details and I'll be happy to provide further information.